Why are 74% of Americans still nervous about flying? Why do you think that is? A recent survey found that 74% of American air travelers admit to being nervous when flying. Nearly half say they are more nervous now than they used to be. That's not a small number. That is 3 out of every 4 people on your flight gripping the armrest, watching the wings, and bracing for something that almost certainly will never happen. Today, I want to talk about fear itself, where it comes from, and what it costs you, and the proof that it can be completely overcome. But before I get into it, if you are a nervous flyer and you want a complete guide to help you through your next flight, I put one together and it's completely free. You can check out the link in the description below. Let me tell you a little personal story. I call it the crew room. I want to tell you about a man that I knew many years ago. He was one of those people who lit up every room he walked into. He was a genuinely nice guy. Always smiling, always with a joke ready in the crew room. The kind of person that everybody was glad to see, all the time. This was about 30 years ago, during a particularly tense period of contract negotiations between our pilot union and airline management. Tensions were running high. There was a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors, a lot of worst case scenarios being floated around. That's kind of the nature of the business. One day I watched this man, this warm, funny, well-liked pilot, completely transform in front of a small group of us. In front of my eyes, he became someone that I barely recognized. He was convinced, he's absolutely certain, that management was going to slash our pay rates, not just freeze them, but cut them. He said it was such certainty, such fear, that you could feel it spreading through the room like a cold wind. So I watched the people around him shift also. Everybody's shoulders tightened, voices dropped. His fear became their fear too. Here's the thing. Everything he worried about never happened. The pay cut he was so terrified about never materialized. Not then, not in the future, not now. The negotiations concluded with a series of enhancements that made things better. Life went on. The catastrophe that he'd built in his mind turned out to be a ghost. But something happened to him in the meantime. Not long after that period, he was diagnosed with a series of serious illnesses. Unfortunately, he passed away not long after, far too young and far too soon. I thought about him many times over the years. I've wondered, whether that unbridled fear of something that never happened played a role in what happened to him. Whether carrying that weight, that constant anticipation of disaster took something out of him, something he couldn't get back. So I'm not a medical doctor. I can't say anything with certainty, but I know that what I saw in that crew room that day was probably a factor. And I also know that fear is not a passive thing. It doesn't just sit quietly inside of you. It moves through you. It changes you. And sometimes it spreads to the people standing closest to you. Let's talk about just the contagion of fear. That brings me to something that stuck with me, recently. I came across a post from a woman named Assunta, and it was in a fear of flying support group. And she had not flown in 5 years. And she said every time she had flown before, she described crying and hyperventilating from the moment she arrived at the airport throughout the entire flight. But here's the part that stopped me cold. She mentioned that her young son had developed the same fear. I think he was 12. He had picked it up watching her. You see, children are extraordinary observers, and they don't need to be told something is dangerous. They can simply watch the person they trust the most, and they learn. This is not a criticism of her. That's just a profound truth about fear. It's contagious. When the leader projects fear, the people around them absorb it. I saw it in that crew room more than 30 years ago. Assunta saw it in her own child. Well, the good news, and this is the part that matters, is that courage is equally contagious. But first, if takeoff is the moment that bothers you the most, I also created a 12-minute audio guide specifically for that. It walks you through every sound and sensation from the gate to wheels up, so nothing catches you off guard. That link also is in the description below. But stay with me now, because what happened next in Assunta's story is exactly why I make these videos. I'm going to call this part really the transformation, because Assunta decided she was going to fly again. She prepared, she read, she watched videos of pilots explaining what was actually happening on the plane. She joined communities of people who understood her fear and had actually faced it themselves. And then she booked 4 flights. 4 flights. Not one cautious trip to test the waters, but 4. And in all that, she did not panic once. When turbulence hit on her last flight, real turbulence, uncomfortable turbulence, she kept playing her game. She told herself that what she had learned would be a benefit to her forever. She reminded herself that turbulence does not bring down an airplane, and she stayed calm. But here's the moment that moved me the most. Her son, the boy who had inherited his mother's fear, who had watched her panic on previous flights, took those 4 flights with her. And now he is no longer afraid of flying. He said he actually enjoys it now. He wants to fly to Italy. Well, they're going to take a trip to Italy. So Assunta is not alone. Just this week, another member of that same community, the support group, took a 90-minute flight with medication in hand. She said her prayers, but landed and feeling like she had conquered something real, a real challenge, because she had conquered something. And her advice to others, don't stop. Keep flying. Never let fear take control and keep you stuck on the ground, missing out on life. You had 2 different people, 2 different journeys, but they had the same result. Think about what that really means. One person's decision to face her fear didn't just change her life, it changed her child's entire relationship with the world, the places he will go, the things he will see, the life he will live. That is what overcoming fear actually costs and what it gives back. And you might say, well, why does fear feel so real on a plane? Why are 74% of people still nervous? Why does that fear persist, even when people know intellectually that flying is safe? That answer comes down to control, or rather the feeling of not having it. When you're sitting back in, say, seat 36B, you can't see what the pilots see. You can't hear what they hear. You cannot feel the aircraft the way they feel it. Every unusual sound, every bump, every bank of the wings happens to you, whether you like it or not. Whether it's something that's under your control. And it's usually not under your control. It's under someone else's control. And the human brain is wired over millions of years to detect danger, fills that information gap with a lot of worst-case scenarios. The pilots up front are not experiencing the same flight you are. They are not passengers in their own aircraft. They are actively managing it actively, constantly, with decades of training behind every decision. What feels like chaos to you in the back of the plane feels like just a regular Tuesday to them up front. The single most powerful antidote to fear, this particular fear, is not really medication, in my opinion. Not so much a massive distraction, not white knuckling through it, but it's actually knowledge. Understanding what is actually happening transforms the unknown into the familiar. And what is familiar is generally not frightening. Let's think about, what the numbers actually tell us. So I'm going to put this 74% in a proper context. Flying remains one of the safest forms of transportation ever developed by human beings. The odds of dying in a car accident are approximately 1 in 100. The odds of dying on a commercial flight are closer to 1 in 11 million. You face more statistical danger driving to the airport than you do to flying itself. The fear is not irrational. The fear feels irrational from the inside, but it's disconnected from the actual risk. And that gap between the perceived danger and the actual dangers is exactly what education does. Assunta closed that gap. Her son closed that gap. And now he wants to fly to Italy. Now, it's something you can do right now. If you are one of those 75%, I see 74%, I don't want to make it harder. If you're one of the 74%, here's what I want you to do. First, keep watching. Every video on this channel exists to close that gap between what fear tells you and what is actually happening on your flight. The more you understand, the less you fear. Second, join a community. Assunta credits the support group she joined as the part that really made the difference. There are thousands of people who understand exactly what you are going through. You're not alone, and you're not broken. Third, take that next flight. Not someday, the next chance you get. Assunta's second piece of wisdom was borrowed from another member of her group, and that was, don't step away from the adrenaline. Just keep flying. Never let that fear rebuild and stop you. Fear shrinks every time you face it, but it grows every time you avoid it. You were not born afraid of flying. You just learn to be that way. And anything you learn, you can really unlearn. So to sum up, if you're a nervous flyer, understanding what pilots know is one of the most powerful things you can do to calm that anxiety. Knowledge replaces fear. I created a 12-minute audio guide specifically for the moment that frightens most flyers, takeoff. Every sound, every sensation, explained calmly before it happens. That link is also in the description below. I'm Captain Paul Thompson, 50 years of flying, Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award recipient, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.